What's that? It could only be episode 138 of the Scottish Liberty Podcast with me, Anthony Samaroff. Sadly, our usual ranter, Tom Laird, can't be joining us this evening, but I have an equally great political ranter, my friend, David Stewart, also my driving instructor. And he's here to talk to you guys and to me about some of the things that are bubbling up in British politics. But don't turn off the podcast, you Yankee boys, because the implications of what we're discussing are sort of evergreen. This is happening everywhere, and I'll make good food for thought. And we'll probably have a great laugh today too. So, David Stewart, he's a history enthusiast, driving instructor, as I've said, and very libertarian minded. I was delighted to find out because you might remember not long ago we had Sean Gabb on the show. And one of the things he said when I said, well, what should us libertarians be doing? He said, it's really important to keep it in the family. And when you have someone do some work for you or something like that, try and see that they've got similar values to what you have. In fact, before I go on, before I introduce David, I just want to mention it was really funny because I think we'd done one or two driving lessons and we'd had a good chat. And David said to me when I came in, he was like, "Oh, I don't usually do this." He was a bit shy about saying it. He was like, "But some of the things you mentioned made me Google you, and I saw that you identify as a libertarian." And my initial reaction was like, I live in Scotland, as you guys know. I mean, um, the initial response was like, am I going to have to get some shit now? Am I going to have to debate some raging lefty who's got serious concerns about it? But I just went, right. How do you feel about that? And he said, I feel very good about it. And I was like, all right, off to a cracking start. And we've not stopped talking politics ever since. So, David, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Absolutely, no problem at all. I'm really pleased to be here. It's a complete new sort of departure for me. So we'll see how we get on.
Great. So just before we get started, people might be interested to know, because obviously, let's face it, the cesspool of red that we know as Scotland is not exactly known for its libertarian inclinations. I know you didn't grow up in Scotland, but how do you think you came to the sort of political opinions you have?
I think it's the old saying, isn't it? If you're not a socialist when you're young, you've got no heart. If you're not a conservative when you're older, you've got no brain. And you move beyond that, and you start looking at things a bit more rationally as you get a bit older. And basically, the ideas of sort of basic economics eventually percolate even into a brain as thick as mine, and you start to kind of come to some basic conclusions about the way the world works. And more and more over the last sort of 20 years or so, it comes to me that I just want people to be left alone to get on with their lives. Simple.
Yeah,
The simpler the better.
maybe you just want left alone. I'm sure you have to talk to quite a lot of people who have politics that you don't necessarily agree with in the car taking lessons.
Oh well, that's just part of the job, and you just try to. They tell you when you start the job, avoid politics, religion, and football, and I usually end up with all three at some point after the first couple of lessons, anyway.
Excellent. Were there any kind of moments where key positions of you changing or sort of merging away from what they were?
Not particularly as things go along. I mean, my wife's from Slovakia, and we watched the old Czechoslovakia breaking up. We watched Eastern Europe getting integrated into what's now the EU, or the current incarnation of the EU. And I'm of an age where you've watched things happen. To me, as a young man, the Berlin Wall appeared to be an ever fixed position. I was quite shocked to find a couple of years ago that it's actually been down now longer than it was even up.
Wow.
But you know, these things happen as you get older, and you start to look back on things. So it's an evolution rather than a road to Damascus thing.
Right. So you've actually got a couple of good stories about your wife experiencing capitalism after Czechoslovakia. Do you mind uh, sharing some of those? Like,
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, as I was saying to you earlier today, I mean, when we first met, which, you know, more than 20 years ago now, I mean, one of having come over here, one of her sort of entertainments was to go to a supermarket and just marvel at the amount of stuff that was on the shelves, and the choice and the availability of things, because it was completely alien to the way she'd been brought up and what she'd had to deal with as a youngster, and it still amazed her for several years after she'd first come here.
yeah, and it's one of the things I think I might have mentioned in the podcast before that changed for me. I remember, you know, being 19 or whatever, and when I go into Tesco's, I think, oh, these capitalists like exploiting people, and you know, they're driving business out the local community, and the local shops can't survive, and they're exploiting people. And now, and even I go into supermarkets and I'm like amazed, like all of this stuff came from all over the world just for us, and we take it for granted. We don't even know he was born. You know, we don't know
Yeah.
how lucky we are. And it's funny because I've got a friend who's from the Czech Republic, uh, and I kind of we go to the theatre, and I was kind of joking with her about you know, all the lefty stuff, and the uh, uh, I, s- I sent I've got an online publication that reviews plays, and I sent her a lot. I sent her a link along to something, and she said she wanted to do it. And I was like, okay, but it'll probably be more lefty shit because we've gone to see some stuff before. And she was like, to be fair, half of the theatre in Scotland is lefty shit. And I was like, well, I think you're understating the matter slightly. And we've kind of got that rapport. But I was thinking to say, you know, we've not had communism in Scotland. And it seems like some people are determined that we learn the lessons firsthand
Yeah.
rather than from other people's mistakes. Which brings me conveniently on to our first broad topic, which is that, yeah, sometimes dinosaurs don't go extinct, and sometimes policies that have been tried the world over again and again and led to nothing. Easy for me to say, led to nothing but disaster. Just keep on getting seanced, or what's it? A necro. The leader of the Labour Party is a necromancer, and he is bringing policies that should have long been dead back to life, and the zombies are coming for our brains. So tell
Indeed,
them,
zombie policies. Yeah.
tell them a little bit about some of the proposals that we're looking at here.
Well, where to start? I mean, I'm well aware that conference season is the point where the swivel-eyed loons on if any party come out of the woodwork and try to prove themselves to be more Catholic than the Pope for the leaders' benefit. But some of the ideas that have come out of this Labour Party conference under Magic Uncle Jeremy are just amazing. I mean, given that the man hasn't had an original idea since 1978, where some of these ideas think they're going to go is quite incredible. We've discussed the ideas for them abolishing private education, for instance.
Yeah, let's start with that because we've not, I don't think we've ever discussed the abolition of private education on the show before. And one thing I would say about that is I had two incidents where one was someone in the street asked me to vote for Solidarity, which is, by the way, for those who don't know, which is pretty much everyone listening, a far left, like decided, like self-confessed far left, pretty much communist party in the UK, and got in a conversation with private schools, and he was like, "Do you think private schools should even exist?" And I was like, and like, yeah, about 7 or 8 years ago, yeah, another friend of mine at the time, her politics have changed a lot since then, but she was dubious as to whether private schools exist. And there's this idea that they confer an unfair advantage upon some people, which of course they do. But there's a lot, well, there's a lot more to unpack. I fear that I'm grandstanding. So what were your original shrieks of horror?
Well, I mean, so some of the rhetoric around the announcement is very interesting. I mean, there's a lot of use of the terms like seizing the assets of these evil schools. We've
Really?
heard that before somewhere. I think if we think back into the 20th century and beyond. Seizing was one of the words, seems to have been one of the great words of the conference. Seizing this and seizing that. It doesn't sit well with me. Things like they're going to demand that only the universities will only now take the same percentage of students from private schools as there is in the population. So if there are 7% of students in private schools, then only 7% of university applications will be allowed to be from private schools. Now, and one of the more interesting statements was that a statement for that all our youth deserve world-class education. Well, yes, you can't argue with that, but that's predicated on the idea that the state is already producing a world-class education, and
Yes.
somehow all we have to do is persuade these weird capitalist people to give up their private schools. And on top of all that, a couple of other things that they put in. For some reason, Ofsted must have pissed off the Labour Party because apparently that's going to be abolished, and a new two-part state inspection system of some nebulous type is going to be introduced. Presumably, one part at least will be controlled by Uncle Jeremy, and will be able to close down schools of which he doesn't approve. And the other thing that struck me was there's absolutely no words in there whatsoever about faith schools.
Right.
Now, one of the bones of contention in Scotland, in particular, has been the divisions caused by faith schools, but across Britain as a whole as well. But of course, the soft left has taken the position that anyone of faith is superior to anyone of no faith. And we have to be nice to people who have a faith, and there's presumably anyone's mythical uncle sat on a cloud is superior than not having one.
That's interesting, because it might strike people as atypical, because the idea of the left is more atheistic and like they've got it in for people of faith, and they're trying to.
Well, yes, how the party of the movement of ultimate atheism has got itself round to the position where it now supports, well, approved faiths anyway above anyone else, is another discussion to be had.
What would you be expecting them to say about faith schools?
Well, they won't say anything, because they'll lose a lot of votes if they start dismantling those. But if they're going to go down the route of dismantling tax breaks for private schools, that could be a complete dog's breakfast if somebody then decides to look into the funding of faith schools.
Well,
so they could be getting themselves into a lot of problems there, I think.
I feel like it should be glaringly obvious to people, but it's not, that the issue is, what is the pressure on government to actually improve the schools? There is none. The most pressure they would get is from the existence of private schools that at least have a little bit more wriggle room to try things out and hopefully improve. And a great libertarian, James Tooley, is on his way to opening 3 private schools in England that can take people in for about $7,000 a year, I think it was, or
Yeah.
no, it's probably remarkably less than that. That might be what the expensive schools are charging. I forget the
But
figures now. It might have been $3,000. He's basically starting up these low cost private schools that cost significantly, maybe half what the state pays for per student. Maybe $8,000 was what the state was paying per student per year, and he's kind of halving it. That's the kind of thing that would make the government have to pull up its socks, and without
and therefore will need to be stamped on from a great height.
that's exactly where this is leading to. It's bad enough that the government so badly regulates private schools that they can't fucking do anything if it doesn't tick off the right boxes. But this is just, you know, going to create a situation where everything's frozen exactly the way it is, and no innovation can happen. I mean, a common joke amongst libertarians is that if you look at any facet of society, it's completely different. We're not rolling around with a horse and cart anymore, but how have the schools changed? Well, they used to have a bunch of people in front of a blackboard. Now sometimes it's a whiteboard. So
Yeah.
there's some, there's your progress for you.
Mm. Exactly, and but as always, the state response is to level everything down to what the state feels it should provide, and not up to what. So the statement about the world class education just rang hollow to me. It seemed a very yes, it's motherhood and apple pie. Of course, every child should be entitled to a world class education, but you ain't providing it.
Yeah, and
So
they never will provide it because no one knows how to provide a good education. Only the complete trial and error of all the people in the world like trying to provide the service can come to conclusions of the market provides,
yes,
given time and a wide berth. Here's a really controversial policy that could potentially improve the situation for poor people, and that's why, or at least people of limited means. People who send their kids to private schools still have to pay for the public schools. So you just create a policy that says, well, you can get up to £3,000 tax rebate for sending your child to private schools, because you're saving the state money by sending your child to a private school. And so we'll give you some of the money that we're saving back, and that will help you pay to send your children to private schools. That would be a good policy for, say, the Conservative Party to adopt, but they probably never will, because it'll make them look more like evil comic book villains who only care about the rich and powerful than they already do.
yes, I'm afraid so. And of course, the big mistake the private schools do is that they actually teach a certain amount of critical thinking and some basic economics, and we can't have that because the state will provide.
Right. So what else has Corbyn got in his magic bag of tricks? I believe well, you can
Well, we've got
highlight this.
if you're looking on the health service or health for the UK, he's decided that a good idea would be a state drugs company.
Interesting.
We come back to the seizing. He's proposing to seize the research of the companies within the UK and force them to divulge their research for a state drugs company. So basically, after about 15 years or more, if your condition can be cured by a badly produced aspirin, you're going to be okay. But after that, you're pretty much fucked.
No one's going to bother doing anything, because as soon as they know that the government can seize the research at any time,
yep,
what's the point?
Exactly. What else have we got on the economy? We're going to reduce everyone to a 4-day, 32-hour working week, which is
legendary.
Just a cracker. Which would require on my back of a fag packet calculations an immediate increase in productivity in the economy of something in excess of 10%. Now, it's taken us 10 years to produce an increase of 2%.
Right.
But according to Magic Uncle Jeremy, all he's got to do is decree that this will happen, and it will happen.
And just for the Americans who don't understand British parlance, that was on the back of a homosexual packet, for anyone who missed it.
Sorry, cigarette packets.
No, they know.
Yeah, or a vape packet in these days.
Yeah, we like to say fag packet. We like to
But
smoke. There's actually an American band called We Smoke Fag, or maybe it's a British band called We Smoke Fags. They were playing on the ambiguity. Go on.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, one only has to imagine what the increase on an NHS budget of 128 billion pounds would be, for reducing everyone to a 32-hour week.
Right.
The wage bill is
Right,
huge.
this is an interesting thing because there's this idea that you can just wave a magic wand and cut the work week down. We've talked before on the show about how it's actually, the investment in machines that helps us. People like to think it's unions, right? But if that was true, why don't they just unionize in Bangladesh and cut the work week down to 30? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Why, when they tried to ban child labor in Bangladesh, all the kids went out into like poverty, begging, prostitution, the worst things, crime, the worst things imaginable. So the unions campaigning for a shorter work week followed the advances in capital investment, which allowed us to produce more stuff. If we got rid of all our machinery tomorrow, we'd be back to working 62 hours a week on a farm. But there's this idea that it can be done by decree. And there's something about 0-hour contracts in there. They want to abolish these, just for people who don't know.
yeah,
Zero-hour contracts are a popular idea here, where an employer can just write a contract with someone as though they're. Do you know more details than that? Basically, they don't have to give them any hours, and their employees, at least hypothetically, don't need to take any hours they're offered. And for some people, it creates a lot of flexibility. But the left are complaining that this puts people in very precarious positions where they can be
yeah,
fired without being fired. Their boss just doesn't offer them any more hours. What they neglect to mention is the fact these only exist because the labour laws here are so arduous and expensive to comply with that this is just a loophole around having to make all the extra contributions and uh, go through all the red tape that would be necessary to employ people in the normal way. You had some stuff about how difficult it is to fire people in Europe that you were talking about today. Can you recap on that?
yeah. I mean, basically, a company that I'm aware of, I mean, they've pretty much given up trying to move into sort of Holland, Belgium, France, because it's simply the employment laws are so labyrinthine that if you take someone on, it's almost impossible then to get rid of them. And if the unit that they've taken on, this is a retail company, if the unit that they've taken on proves to be not profitable, then they're involved in all sorts of costs in then trying to jettison the staff that they've taken on, and it's not really proving to be worth their while to keep trying to expand into those countries, and that applies across a lot of the EU.
And it's interesting because the Scandinavian countries, which the left seem to love, one of the ways that they are more free market, there's plenty of ways that they're less free market than the UK and the US, but one of the ways that they're more free market, it is easier to fire and hire people. In Norway, you don't even need a license to be a lawyer, to practice law. In these countries, there's hardly any occupational licenses compared to here. It's interesting because yeah, basically, if you make it difficult to fire people, you're also making it difficult to hire people because people are going to go, I don't want to take the risk. And you're also making it very difficult for people who are already at a disadvantage, like someone who's gone to prison, someone that's old, someone that's too young, someone that's from an ethnic minority, etc., to get a job, or someone with little experience, because they're going to go with the safest bet. And if you're in any disadvantaged group, that ain't going to be you. And yet we hear from the left all the time how much they love these disadvantaged groups. Well, they seem intent on shooting them in the foot.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the 0 hour contract thing, it's an option. It's got to be, it's not going to suit everyone, obviously. But you've got to keep your employment laws as flexible as possible. We've got to a position in the UK now where we have more people in employment than we've ever had, and our unemployment statistics are at historic lows. To some extent, that's impinging on the productivity, because we've tended to go with cheap labour rather than investing in technology. But that's something that will work its way out over time. But you never hear the good news. Obviously, particularly from the left, it's always we're always on the edge of disaster at every point. Economic, it's all going to go horribly wrong because of the evil bosses. And really, we've done remarkably well to keep the economy going as it is, even in the face of the Brexit chaos. And the uncertainty facing both the UK and Scotland possibly independently. And that's because the employment laws actually work quite well. Getting shot of things like 0 hour contracts is only going to go one way. It's only going to result in higher unemployment. Unless, of course, we throw the foreigners out. But that's... But the left won't. Yeah. Anyway, that's not a serious option, because the country would collapse overnight.
I'm not even sure that throwing the foreigners out works that way, because that's also all those people not actually spending money in the shop. I think that
technically we're all foreigners anyway, but that's right. Another matter.
Do you want to? Yeah, that's quite. Let's go into segue actually. That's the segue music, by the way, because you were talking about this thing about, because you're obviously a historian, and one of the things that you love to argue with people about on the internet is like their silly views on history. And you're talking about this idea of like distinct peoples and all of us being, well, distinct peoples as being bullshit, and foreigners, and how we're all foreigners. I know this is just like wild, but let's hear a bit, because you're a good ranter. So let's hear something of what you get onto on the internet with the idiots.
Right. Okay. Well, where do we go with this? It's you get an awful lot of people who seem to believe that if we just go back far enough, we're going to come up with some sort of pure race, and it's that's where my people come from, and that's where it's all been downhill since that pure race got polluted by the races around them. It's complete nonsense. The DNA research, amongst other things, tells us that basically in Western Europe, since the Ice Age, we've got an overlay of we've got a basic population who moved out of the refuges when the ice moved away. The hunter-gatherers, they were overlaid by various other input, and then they pretty much stayed where they are. And over the last 7,000 years or so, it's just been a mixing of those peoples, and occasionally the top people, the ruling classes have killed each other, and somebody else has come along.
And that was one of the interesting points. That's one of the interesting points you made, because you said a lot of the things that happen where people think that people went in and massacred people, it wasn't like that. They just went in and killed the leaders, and then the people were pretty much like, new boss, much like the old boss, even if they were of different sort of ethnicities and so what have you. It didn't really make much odds.
Yeah. Ethnicity is a flexible thing. language, for instance, follows political power. Language is not synonymous with ethnicity. It's not synonymous with race. So when the ancestors of the English turned up on the east coast of these islands, they turned up with their language. They killed the ruling class and said, "Okay, boys, you all belong to us now." And everybody just went, "Okay, I'm going to go back to tending the pigs." And they did. And over time, the language changed, because you've got to be able to talk to the boss somehow. And you might want to be able to sell your daughter to him at some point. So that's basically how it worked. The idea that the locals got massacred and driven off their land, and these invaders turned up is not quite self-evident.
You can say bollocks if you want. Bollocks if you want. It's an interesting thing, because there's a rising romanticism for sort of feudalism on the right, in the extreme of the right at the moment, and some of the crossover between sort of libertarian-minded people and alt-right. I don't just mean, like, there is a famous libertarian philosopher, Hans Hermann Hoppe, who does write that monarchism is better than libertarianism, than democracy. But he is an anarchist. He says, monarchy is least worst, but the best is to have no state. But I don't mean that he's romantic for feudalism. It's people who are adjacent to him. Sort of meant to say Smallbug, and also made up name, totally fucking made up name. No one's called that. And it's interesting, because as we've spoken about history and sort of feudalism and stuff like that in the car, it's kind of brought to light how undesirable that kind of thing was. And I think that it's funny, because one of the problems with the right is they've got a tendency to identify themselves with whatever they're not, instead of finding out what their principles are and championing those. The American right have been better at it than we have in Europe, but it's like that's why I like being a libertarian. Like, it's like, no, we have principles like the non-aggression principle. We kind of know what we stand for, and I feel like there's a certain subset that's like, whatever the left likes, we want to do the opposite of that. So the left don't like Christianity, so we're all going to go and reclaim our Christianity and become super fervent about it, even though I don't really believe that a lot of them actually believe in the doctrines. They're just like, this is Western civilization. What is Western civilization in your opinion?
Bang.
Sorry. Bang. I don't know. It just came
easy
to me.
One. It's an agglomeration of ideas over time. We've gone from excuse me, a tribal society through medieval kingship, and we had the I suppose you could say we went through the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, and we've ended up where we are. There's not much. What can you say? It's how do you sum it all up? I don't think you can, because if you want to call it the Anglo-Saxon experience, the Anglo-Saxon idea of civilization is not necessarily the same as even somebody as close as the French idea or Southern Europe. So we've got something of a. In many ways, I think the Anglophone world should hang together a lot more than it really does. Right. But that perhaps that's another discussion for another day as well. It's Western civilization. Maybe the Neil Ferguson sort of idea. Right. It's worked its way through economic circumstances. It became dominant in the world, and it possibly is in danger of sliding away again.
I didn't Gandhi say it would be a good idea? Western civilization. When he was asked, "What do you think of Western civilization?" he said, "I think it would be a good idea." The wee
Well,
cheeky
yeah.
bastard.
Yeah.
It's such a it's a kind of an open question. Like it's a empty box that you can put whatever you prefer it to be into.
Mm.
So I guess, but yeah, so we've had some crazy shit go down on the in our parliament here. I don't know the exact details because I don't pay attention to politics that well, which is usually how Tam compliments me because I'm more the sort of economics philosophy man. He's more the current affairs man. I wish he was here because you guys would have a thrilling chat. Um, but
Excellent.
alas, um, we're getting off. What I wanted to say, I think roughly what happened is because of the difficulty on coming to a Brexit deal, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, who was not elected but was put into place after Theresa May had to step down because she was dreadful
Mhm.
by the party, basically suspended Parliament because he couldn't get a deal on Brexit and said, right, fuck that, I'm going to do it. I think he had to go to the Queen to get permission to do it.
Mhm.
And that's now gone to the court and been ruled unconstitutional.
Mm.
Did I get it right?
I think so. Yeah, basically, as far I mean, that's pretty much my understanding as well.
So,
Um, so they've all
so
come back again, having had two years to sort stuff out and failed to sort anything out in 2 years. They're now supposed to be able to do it in the next couple of weeks. I ain't going to hold my breath.
right, okay. And it's a funny thing because, well, I don't know. It's interesting because and this may be overstated, but obviously Trump's painted as an autocrat and whatnot. And it would seem to me, on one hand, that Boris Johnson suspending Parliament looked pretty autocratic. On the other hand, if this had gone the other way, if being for Brexit was the politically correct position on the left right now, or just the politically correct position in the culture, and the left were losing, the same thing had happened, but the shoe was on the other foot. They'd be going, oh, it's not autocratic. The people had a vote. The people spoken. What he's doing to put into action the will of the people. And
Yeah.
this is what really annoys me because it's so transparent. Like, if Google and Twitter and what not have you were deplatforming communists largely, the left would be going, oh, this is autocratic, it's we need an openness of dialogue. But because it's not just people, it's not just right-wing people. A lot of the people who've been deplatformed have been quite moderate on a lot of issues. They've just not been woke enough on something. They're going, well, they're a private company, they've got the right to do it. And they're also going, well, oh yeah, suddenly they love private companies. And they're also going, uh, not all forms of speech are equally valid, and it's to them. I just don't believe that they have a principled stance on anything. It drives you absolutely
No. I mean,
mad.
coming back to the Labour Party conference, for instance, one of their things under their Home Affairs heading is that they want to instigate an investigation into the rise of far right extremism, um, uh, which means that presumably anyone that doesn't agree with them is now going to be deplatformed and is going to be. These are people who sang the red flag in Parliament not long since.
Right.
Um,
Well, the thing is,
that flag presided over the deaths of probably more people than the Nazis did. But no, apparently that's perfectly okay. The far right have to be investigated in great detail, and we have to root it out.
and
And
yeah,
on top of that, they're going to also bring in a new youth service.
oh yeah,
Where have we heard that before in the 20th century?
right.
Yeah.
The youth service, that sounds quite familiar.
Hmm. but yeah, so it's all very exciting. What
So
Uncle Jeremy.
what's the youth service to entail for the young?
Well, we're going to make sure that they get the best opportunities that they possibly could from the state. So we're going to make sure that they are not being not being influenced by malign forces.
Are they, is this like meant to be like mandatory public service like in Germany?
I don't quite know. It's all couched in very very woolly, vague terms at the moment. But
Right. So these
they may have to
make
wear
work pro
they
I,
may all have to wear a particular hat. Probably one approved by Jeremy.
right.
Made of corduroy.
Yeah, I thought the left were trying to distance themselves from the Nazis, but you
Hmm.
know, Hitler's make work programs sound good to lots of people. So uh,
Yeah.
both on the left and the right these days. Okay, so we can't finish off without talking about little Greta.
Oh,
Little
lovely.
Greta, right?
Yes. Well, yes.
She's been the talk of Facebook. I went
Yeah.
on Facebook and I saw nothing but post after post of her. It's a
I
few
know.
very, it was just constant. And to be honest, I'd say because I've got a whole host of libertarians on my Facebook, most of them were uh, unfavorable. But but there were so many different degrees of unfair favorability. Some people were just making fun of her, and then there was people going, "This is terrible that they're indoctrinating our children," and also look how terrified she is. And but then I've got other people who love her and think she's wonderful for being so impassioned and caring and trying to
Absolutely.
wake the world up. You know,
Absolutely. I like nothing better than being lectured by a 15-year-old Cabbage Patch doll. Um, she's
well, we know firmly which side of the debate that you come down on. Let's
She
hear
was
more about it.
quite amazing. I think I told you came across. I mean, the complete bullshit she was spouting, of course. Came across a set of statistics showing the number of people killed by climate catastrophe since the 1920s. In the 1920s, it was running at 500,000 souls a year. By
Wow, that's a
last year,
lot.
it's running less than 50,000. So
But
the idea
David,
that
don't you
we're all
understand? It's
dying,
a hockey stick graph. It's exponential.
yeah, they've just
Suddenly,
put it the wrong way up.
right, one day we're going to be, that's pretty clever. One day we're going to be fine. The next day it's going to be slightly hot. And the next day the skin is going to be melting off our faces.
Well, if that's the case, there's not much we can do about it.
Yeah, I
As
know.
you,
I was saying that. Yeah. In the car today, I was like, look, see if this is really as bad as you think it was. Just shut up and die with the rest of us. Because what are we going to do? Are we going to fucking all stop driving tomorrow? See if it's as serious as you say. Just make it illegal for anyone to drive. Because that's
one
the
of the more
only
interesting
solution.
things is she's or her supporters are filing a law case against what appear to be 5 random countries picked out of a hat under some sort of legislation to do with children, and yet she's ignoring China, India, and Russia absolutely completely. She's picked on the French and the Germans for some reason. It's perfectly legitimate. I'm quite happy for people to pick on the French and the Germans if that's what they want. But completely ignoring the 3
Yeah,
largest polluters on the
right.
planet seems somewhat random. It's got
Yeah,
to
it
be.
is random.
And but then, of course, if we upset the Germans, then upset the Chinese, then the next time she's taking a plastic boat across the Atlantic, it might just sink.
It's amazing that they say that how selective in issues that you've ruined our future argument runs. I mean, they never care to say, well, you're ruining the kids' futures by running up a national debt, the likes of which has never been seen before and will never be seen again, most likely,
Well,
because, that's not because it's all about spending other people's money. The state is all about spending other people's money. None of these things ever seem particularly, none of these outrages ever seem particularly anti-state. They always seem to be calling the same bureaucrats who fucked everything up, who in their eyes are fucking everything up. They're saying, please take more power. Please take more power over the economy in order to represent the economy in our favor. Like, see if they've messed it up that badly. What makes you think they've got it in them to sort of sort it out again? You know, oh my, like this typical left. Oh, the state, you know, it creates all these wars and stuff like that. It's so dreadful. Like, stop the wars. Let's give the state more power over the economy. The same exact people.
Exactly. I know. She just particularly annoying as far as I'm concerned. There was an interesting piece on the computer today about somebody jumping up and down and claiming that Republican senators in their 40s should be ashamed for taking her to task and attacking a poor innocent 15-year-old girl who's so obviously emotionally driven by the crisis approaching, and they should be ashamed of themselves. No, the people who should be ashamed of themselves are the people who've put an emotionally vulnerable 15-year-old suffering from Asperger's up in front of the cameras, given a crap to spout, and then expect people to just politely applaud and go away and do what they're told. Those are the people who should be ashamed of themselves. If she's going to give it out, she's got to be able to take it, and putting people in that position is unforgivable. Having put her in that position is unforgivable. Of course, the ultimate aim is to be able to then point to those same senators and shout white privilege and you misogynistic bastards. You shouldn't be allowed to live any longer. But that's the ultimate aim, of course. It's all very sad. It's all very sad. Look, if anyone cares to take a look at the figures, then of course we're not facing the sort of catastrophe that she seems to think we are, given that the girl believes she can see carbon dioxide. It's not really surprising that she believes as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast, as Alice said.
Yeah, but it does make you think, are they actually absolutely terrifying the young ones? I mean, with all this, there are 3 issues here. One is there global warming? Is it? Couldn't have said it better myself. Is there global warming? Is it anthropogenic? Is it catastrophic? And you know, I don't have the scientific background to answer those questions, but I'm extremely skeptical because when the only solution offered is more state power, especially when you look at it, the state's the one that built all the roads that all the cars are going on. The state's the one that I think at one point there was a paper that said the military effort in Iraq was going through more oil than the entire Indian economy. When the war on terror was going through more oil at one point than the entire Indian economy. You know, the government is the largest polluter because the government can externalize. Well, you know, I mentioned today, you know, that thing in Flint where the government had terrible time with the municipal water. If that was a private company, they'd be finished, right?
Yes.
But people say you can't replace the state. The best you can do is go vote. So I don't know. I think the future is good. I think when you look, one of the things that struck me was earlier on, she used this cliche of you guys worship economic growth. Economic growth is not a perfect measure of economic well-being by any means, but it does seem to be strongly correlated with bringing people out of poverty and improving living standards.
And if anything is going to save us, that's what's going to save us, not
Yeah,
going back to horses and carts.
yeah, we kind of need the wealth. We need the wealth to combat the problems. And, you know, there are some people like Matt Ridley and Patrick Moore who do good work on global warming and this kind of stuff. I think we're coming up to the hour mark. Any closing words on the show?
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I wasn't very coherent, but maybe if there's a next time, I'll be a bit better. I'll try and prepare a bit better.
Oh, nothing of the sort. It's been a pleasure to have you. Cool.